Howdy, folks. I wanted to apologize because I know it's been a while since I've read a chapter here. I've had some things going on with work that have demanded some of my attention, and I'm still kind of dealing with that a little bit, so I apologize. I'll try and be a little better about getting these posted up more regularly, but I just wanted to let you know where I've been and apologize for not being quite as frequent as I have been. Anyway, jumping here into chapter 12. It was the smell Leia noticed first as she drifted slowly awake. A smoky smell, reminiscent of the wood fires of the Ewoks of Endor, but with a tangy sharpness all its own. A warm, homey sort of aroma, reminding her of the campouts she'd had as a child on Alderaan. And then she woke up enough to remember where she was. Full consciousness flooded in, and she snapped open her eyes, to find herself lying on a rough pallet in the corner of the Nogri communal bakehouse, exactly where she'd been when she'd fallen asleep the night before. She sat up, feeling relieved and a little ashamed. What with that unexpected visit last night by the Grand Admiral, she realized she'd half expected to wake up in a Star Destroyer detention cell. Clearly, she'd underestimated the Nogri's ability to stick by their promises. Her stomach growled, reminding her that it had been a long time since she'd eaten. A little lower down, one of the twins kicked a reminder of his own. Okay, she soothed. I get the hint. Breakfast time. She tore the top off a ration bar from one of her cases and took a bite, looking around the bakehouse as she chewed. Against the wall by the door, the double pallet that had been laid out for Chewbacca to sleep on was empty. For a moment, the fear of betrayal again whispered to her, but a little concentration through the Force silenced any concerns. Chewbacca was somewhere nearby, with a sense that gave no indication of danger. Relax, she ordered herself sternly, pulling a fresh jumpsuit out of her case and starting to get dressed. Whatever these Nogri were, it was clear they weren't savages. They were honorable people in their own way, and they wouldn't turn her over to the Empire. At least, not until they'd herded her out. She downed the last bite of ration bar and finished dressing, making sure as always that her belt didn't hang too heavily across her increasingly swollen belly. Retrieving her lightsaber from its hiding place under the edge of the pallet, she fastened it prominently to her side. Kabarak, she remembered, had seemed to find reassurance of her identity in the presence of the Jedi weapon. Hopefully, the rest of the Nogri would also respond that way. Stepping to the big house door, she ran through her Jedi calming exercises and went outside. Three small Nogri children were playing with an inflatable ball in the grassy area outside the door, their grayish white skin glistening with perspiration in the bright morning light. A sunlight that wasn't going to last, Leia saw. A uniform layer of dark clouds extending all the way to the west was even now creeping its way east towards the rising sun. All for the best. A thick layer of clouds would block any direct telescopic observations the Star Destroyer up there might make of the village, as well as diffusing the non-Nogri infrared signatures she and Chewbacca were giving off. She looked back down to find that the three children had halted their game and formed a straight line in front of her. Hello, she said, trying a smile on them. The child in the middle stepped forward and dropped to his knees in an awkward but passable imitation of his elder's gesture of respect. Rush, he mewed. Mishkaska, if Krumshimak, Miriska. I see, Leia said, wishing fervently that she had 3PO with her. She was just wondering if she should risk calling him on the comlink when the child spoke again. I greet you, Rush, he said, the basic words coming out mangled but understandable. The Matriarch waits for you in the Duca. Thank you, Leia nodded gravely to him. Door wardens last night, official greeters this morning. Nogri children seem to be introduced into the early rituals and responsibilities of their culture. Please escort me to her. The child made the respect gesture again and got back to his feet, heading off towards the large circular structure that Kabarak had landed next to the night before. Leia followed, the other two children taking up positions to either side of her. She found herself throwing short glances at them as they walked, wondering at the light color of their skin. Kabarak's skin was a steel gray. The Matrax had been much darker. Did the Nagri consist of several distinct racial types, or was the darkening a natural part of their aging process? She made a mental note to ask Kabarak about it when she had a chance. The dukkha, seen now in full daylight, was far more elaborate than she'd realized. The pillars spaced every few meters around the wall seemed to be composed of whole sections of tree trunk, stripped of bark and smoothed to a black marble finish. The shimmery wood that made up the rest of the wall was covered to perhaps half its height with intricate carvings. As they got closer, she could see that the reinforcing metal band that encircled the building just beneath the eaves was also decorated. Clearly, the Nagri believed in combining function and art. The whole structure was perhaps 20 meters across and 4 meters high, with another 3 or 4 meters for the conical roof, and she found herself wondering how many more pillars they'd had to put inside to support the thing. Tall double doors had been built into the walls between two of the pillars, flanked at the moment by two straight backed Nagri children. They pulled open the doors as Leia approached. Nodding her thanks, she stepped inside. The interior of the dukkha was no less impressive than its exterior. It was a single open room with a throne like chair 2/3 of the way to the back, a small booth with an angled roof and a dark meshed window built against the wall between two of the pillars to the right, and a wall chart of some sort directly across from it on the left. There were no internal support pillars. Instead, a series of heavy chains had been strung from the top of each of the wall pillars to the edge of a large concave dish hanging over the center of the room. From inside the dish, just inside its rim, Leia decided, hidden lights played upward against the ceiling, providing a softly diffuse illumination. A few meters in front of the chart, a group of perhaps 20 small children were sitting in a semicircle around 3PO, who was holding forth in their language with what was obviously some kind of story, complete with occasional sound effects. It brought to mind the condensed version of their struggle against the Empire that he'd given the Ewoks, and Leia hoped the droid would remember not to vilify Darth Vader here. Presumably he would. She'd drummed the point into him often enough during the voyage. A small movement off to the left caught her eye. Chewbacca and Kabarak were sitting facing each other on the other side of the door, engaged in some kind of quiet activity that seemed to involve hands and wrists. The Wookiee had paused and was looking questioningly in her direction. Leia nodded her assurance that she was all right, trying to read from his sense just what he and Kabarak were doing. At least it didn't seem to involve ripping the Nogri's arms out of their sockets. That was something, anyway. Lady Vader, a gravelly Nogri voice said. Leia turned back to see the matrak walking up to her. I greet you. You slept well? Quite well, Leia told her. Your hospitality has been most honorable. She looked over at 3PO, wondering if she should call him back to his duties as a translator. The matrak misunderstood. It is the history time for the children, she said. Your machine graciously volunteered to tell them the last story of our Lord Darth Vader. Vader's final self sacrificial defiance against the Emperor, with Luke's life hanging in the balance. Yes, Leia murmured. It took until the end, but he was finally able to rid himself of the Emperor's web of deception. For a moment, the matrak was silent. Then she stirred. Walk with me, Lady Vader. She turned and began walking along the wall. Leia joined her, noticing for the first time that the Duca's inner walls were decorated with carvings too. A historical record of their family? My third son has gained a new respect for your Wookiee, she said, gesturing towards Chewbacca and Kabarak. Our Lord the Grand Admiral came last eve seeking proof that my third son had deceived him about his flying craft being broken. Because of your Wookiee, he found no such proof. Leia nodded. Yes, Chewie told me last night about gimmicking the ship. I don't have his knowledge of spaceship mechanics, but I know it can't be easy to fake a pair of link malfunctions the way that he did. It's fortunate for all of us that he had the foresight and skill to do so. The Wookiee is not of your family or clan, the matrak said. Yet you trust him, as if he were a friend. Leia took a deep breath. I never knew my true father, the Lord Vader, as I was growing up. I was instead taken to Alderaan and raised by the Viceroy as if I were his own child. On Alderaan, as seems to also be the case here, family relationships were the basis of our culture and society. I grew up memorizing lists of aunts and uncles and cousins, learning how to place them in order of closeness to my adoptive line. She gestured to Chewbacca. Chewie was once merely a good friend. Now he's part of my family, as much a part as my husband and brother are. They were perhaps a quarter of the way around the Duca before the matriarch spoke again. Why have you come here? Kabarak told me his people needed help, Leia said simply. I thought there might be something I could do. Some will say you have come to sow discord among us. You said that yourself last night, Leia reminded her. I can only give you my word that discord is not my intention. The matriarch made a long hissing sound that ended with a sharp double click of needle teeth. The goal and the end are not always the same, Lady Vader. Now we serve one overclan only. You would require service to another. This is the seed of discord and death. Leia pursed her lips. Does service to the Empire satisfy you, then? She asked. Does it gain your people better life or higher honor? We serve the Empire as one clan, the matriarch said. For you to demand our service would be to bring back the conflicts of old. They had reached the wall chart now, and she gestured a thin hand up towards it. Do you see our history, Lady Vader? Leia craned her neck to look. Neatly carved lines of alien script covered the bottom two-thirds of the wall, with each word connected to a dozen others in a bewildering crisscross of vertical, horizontal, and angled lines, each cut seemingly of a different width and depth. Then she got it. The chart was a genealogical tree, either of the entire clan Kimbar, or else just this particular family. I see it, she said. Then you see the terrible destruction of life created by the conflicts of old, the matriarch said. She gestured to 3 or 4 places on the chart which were, to Leia, indistinguishable from the rest of the design. Reading Nogri genealogies was apparently an acquired skill. I do not wish to return to those days, the matriarch continued. Not even for the daughter of the Lord Darth Vader. I understand, Leia said quietly, shivering as the ghosts of Yavin, Hoth, Endor, and 100 more rose up before her. I've seen more conflict and death in my lifetime than I ever thought possible. I have no wish to add to the list. Then you must leave, the matriarch said firmly. You must leave and not come back while the Empire lives. They began to walk again. Is there no alternative? Leia asked. What if I could persuade all of your people to leave their service to the Empire? There would be no conflict then among you. The Emperor aided us when no one else would, the matriarch reminded her. That was only because we didn't know about your need, Leia said, feeling a twinge of conscience as the half-truth. Yes, the Alliance had truly not known about the desperate situation here. And yes, Mon Mothma and the other leaders would certainly have wanted to help if they had. But whether they would have had the resources to actually do anything was another question entirely. We know now, and we offer you our help. Do you offer us aid for our own sakes? The matriarch asked pointedly. Or merely to wrest our service from the Empire to your overclan? We will not be fought over like a bone among hungry Stava. The Emperor used you, Leia said flatly, as the Grand Admiral uses you now. Has the aid they've given been worth the sons they've taken from you and sent off to die? They had gone another 20 steps or so before the matriarch answered. Our sons have gone, she said softly. But with their service they have brought us life. You came in a flying craft, Lady Vader. You saw what was done to our land. Yes, Leia said with a shiver. It. I hadn't realized how widespread the destruction had been. Life on Honoghr has always been a struggle, the matriarch said. The land has required much labor to tame. You saw on the history the times when the struggle was lost, but after the battle in the sky. She shuddered, a peculiar kind of shaking that seemed to move from her hips upward to her shoulders. It was like a war between gods. We know now that it was only large flying craft high above the land, but then we knew nothing of such things. Their lightning flashed across the sky, through the night and into the next day, brightening the distant mountains with their fury. And yet there was no thunder, as if those same gods were too angry even to shout at each other as they fought. I remember being more frightened of the silence than any other part of it. Only once was there a distant crash like thunder. It was much later before we learned that one of our higher mountains had lost its uppermost peak. Then the lightning stopped, and we dared to hope that the gods had taken their war away from us. Until the ground shake came. She paused, another shudder running through her. The lightning had been the anger of the gods. The ground shake was their war hammer. Whole cities vanished as the ground opened up beneath them. Fire mountains that had been long quiet sent out flame and smoke that darkened the sky over all the land. Forests and fields burned, as did cities and villages that had survived the ground shake itself. From those who had died came sickness, and still more died after them. It was as if the fury of the sky gods had come amongst the gods of the land, and they too were fighting amongst themselves. And then, when finally we dared to hope it was over, the strange smelling rain began to fall. Leia nodded, the whole sequence of events painfully clear. One of the warring ships had crashed, setting off massive earthquakes and releasing toxic chemicals which had been carried by wind and rain to every part of the planet. There were any number of such chemicals in use aboard a modern warship, but it was only the older ships that carried anything as virulent as this chemical must have been. Older ships, which had been virtually all the Rebel Alliance had had to fight with in the beginning. A fresh surge of guilt twisted like a blade in her stomach. We did this, she thought miserably. Our ship. Our fault. Was it the rain that killed the plants? The Empire's people had a name for what was in the rain, the matriarch said. I do not know what it was. They came soon after the disaster, then. The Lord Vader and the others. Yes. The matriarch waved her hands to encompass the area around them. We had gathered together here, all who were left alive and could make the journey. This place had always been a truce ground between clans. We had come here to try to find a way for survival. It was here that the Lord Vader found us. They walked in silence for another minute. Some believed then that he was a god, the matriarch said. All feared him and the mighty silver flying craft that had brought him and his attendants from the sky. But even amid the fear, there was anger at what the gods had done to us, and nearly 2 tens of warriors chose to attack. And were duly slaughtered, Leia said grimly. The thought of effectively unarmed primitives taking on Imperial troops made her wince. They were not slaughtered, the matriarch retorted, and there was no mistaking the pride in her voice. Only 3 of the 2 tens died in the battle. In turn, they killed many of the Lord Vader's attendants, despite their lightning weapons and rock garments. It was only when the Lord Vader himself intervened that the warriors were defeated. But instead of destroying us, as some of the attendants counseled, he instead offered us peace. Peace, and the blessing and aid of the Emperor. Leia nodded, one more piece of the puzzle falling into place. She had wondered why the Emperor would have bothered with what to him would have been nothing more than a tiny group of primitive non-humans. But primitive non-humans with that kind of natural fighting skill were something else entirely. What sort of aid did he bring? All that was needed, the matriarch said. Food and medicine and tools came at once. Later, when the strange rain began to kill our crops, he sent the metal droids to begin cleaning their poison from our lands. Leia winced, freshly aware of her twin's vulnerability. But the analysis kit had found no trace of anything toxic in the air as they approached the village, and Chewbacca and Kabarak had done similar tests on the soil. Whatever it was that had been in the rain, the decon droids had done a good job of getting rid of it. And still nothing will grow outside of the cleaned land? Only the culm grass, the matriarch said. It is a poor plant, of no use as food, but it alone can grow now, and even it no longer smells as it once did. Which explained the uniform brown color that she and Chewbacca had seen from space. Somehow that particular plant had adapted to the toxic soil. Did any of the animals survive? She asked. Some did. Those who could eat the culm grass, and those which in turn ate them. But they are few. The matriarch lifted her head, as if looking in her mind's eye towards the distant hills. This place was never rich with life, Lady Vader. Perhaps that was why the clans had chosen it as a truce ground. But even in so desolate a place, there were still animals and plants without count. They are gone now. She straightened up, visibly putting the memory behind her. The Lord Vader helped us in other ways as well. He sent attendants to teach our sons and daughters the ways and customs of the Empire. He issued new orders to allow all clans to share the clean land, though for all clans to live beside one another this way had never happened since the beginning. She gestured around her. And he sent mighty flying craft into the desolation, to find and bring to us our clan dukas. She turned her dark eyes to gaze at Leia. We have an honorable peace, Lady Vader. Whatever the cost, we pay it gladly. Across the room, the children had apparently finished their lesson and were getting to their feet. One of them spoke to 3PO, making a sort of truncated version of their face-down bow. The droid replied, and the whole group turned and headed for the door, where two adults awaited them. Break time? Leia asked. The clan lessons are over for today, the matriarch said. The children must now begin their share of the work of the village. Later in the evening, they will have the lessons which will equip them to someday serve the Empire. Leia shook her head. It's not right, she told the matriarch as the children filed out of the duca. No people should have to sell their children in return for life. The matriarch gave a long hiss. It is the debt we owe, she said. How else shall we pay it? Leia squeezed her thumb and forefinger together. How else indeed? Clearly the Empire was quite happy with the bargain it had made, and having seen the Honoghr commandos in action, she could well understand its satisfaction. They wouldn't be interested in letting the Honoghr buy out of their debt in any other way, and if the Honoghr themselves considered their service to be a debt of honor to their saviors. I don't know, she had to concede. A movement to the side caught her attention. Kabarak, still sitting on the floor across the room, had fallen over onto his side, with Chewbacca's hand engulfing his wrist. It looked like fighting, except that Chewbacca's sense didn't indicate anger. What are they doing over there? She asked. Your Wookiee has asked my third son to instruct him in our fighting methods, the matriarch answered, pride again touching her voice. Wookiees have great strength, but no knowledge of the subtlety of combat. It was probably not an assessment the Wookiees themselves would have agreed with, but Leia had to admit that Chewbacca, at least, had always seemed to rely mainly on brute force and bowcaster accuracy. I'm surprised he was willing to have Kabarak teach him, she said. He's never really trusted him. Perhaps it is that same distrust that whets his interest, the matriarch said dryly. Leia had to smile. Perhaps. For a minute they watched in silence as Kabarak showed Chewbacca two more wrist and arm locks. They seemed to be variants of techniques Leia had learned in her youth on Alderaan, and she shivered once at the thought of those moves with Wookiee muscle behind them. You understand the cycle of our life now, Lady Vader, the matriarch said quietly. You must realize that we still hang by spider silk. Even now, we do not have enough clean land to grow sufficient food. We must continue to buy from the Empire. Payment for which requires that much more service from your sons. Leia nodded, grimacing. Permanent debt. The oldest form of covert slavery in the galaxy. It also encourages the sending away of our sons, the Matrak added bitterly. Even if the Empire allowed it, we could not now bring all of our sons home. We would not have food for them. Leia nodded again. It was as neat and tidy a box as she'd ever seen anyone trapped in. She should have expected no less from Vader and the Emperor. You'll never be entirely out of their debt, she told the Matrak bluntly. You know that, don't you? As long as you're useful to them, the Grand Admiral will make sure of that. Yes, the Matrak said softly. It has taken a long time, but I now believe that. If all Nogri believed so, changes could perhaps be made. But the rest of the Nogri still believe the Empire is their friend? Not all believe so, but enough. She stopped and gestured upward. Do you see the starlight, Lady Vader? Leia looked up at the concave dish that hung 4 meters off the ground at the intersection of the wall support chains. About 1.5 meters across, it was composed of some kind of black or blackened metal and perforated with hundreds of tiny pinholes. With the light from the inside rim of the dish winking through like stars, the whole effect was remarkably like a stylized version of the night sky. I see it. The Nogri have always loved the stars, the Matrak said, her voice distant and reflective. Once, long ago, we worshipped them. Even after we knew what they were, they remained our friends. There were many among us who would have gladly gone with the Lord Vader, even without our debt, for the joy of traveling among them. I understand, Leia murmured. Many in the galaxy feel the same way. It's the common birthright of us all. A birthright which we have now lost. Not lost, Leia said, dropping her gaze from the star dish. Only misplaced. She looked over at Kabarak and Chewbacca. Perhaps if I talk to all the Nogri leaders at once. What would you say to them? The Matrak countered. Leia bit at her lip. What would she say? That the Empire was using them? But the Nogri perceived it as a debt of honor. That the Empire was pacing the cleanup job so as to keep them on the edge of self-sufficiency without ever reaching it? But at the rate the decontamination was going, she would be hard-pressed to prove any such lagging, even to herself. That she and the New Republic could give the Nogri back their birthright? But why should they believe her? As you see, Lady Vader, the Matrak said into the silence, perhaps matters will someday change. But until then, your presence here is a danger to us as much as to you. I will honor the pledge of protection made by my third son, and not reveal your presence to our Lord the Grand Admiral. But you must leave. Leia took a deep breath. Yes, she said, the word hurting her throat. She'd had such hopes for her diplomatic and Jedi skills here. Hopes that those skills, plus the accident of her lineage, would enable her to sweep the Nogri out from under the Empire's fist and bring them over to the New Republic. And now the contest was over, almost before it had even begun. What in space was I thinking about when I came here, she wondered bleakly. I will leave, she said aloud, because I don't wish to bring trouble to you or your family. But the day will come, Matrak, when your people will see for themselves what the Empire is doing to them. When that happens, remember that I'll always be ready to assist you. The Matrak bowed low. Perhaps that day will come soon, Lady Vader. I await it, as do others. Leia nodded, forcing a smile. Over before it had begun. Then we must make arrangements to... She broke off as across the room the double doors flew open and one of the child door wardens stumbled inside. Matrak! He all but squealed. Mirak Ser Ki! Rachmani! Virak! Kabarak was on his feet in an instant. Out of the corner of her eye, Leia saw 3PO stiffen. What is it? She demanded. It is the flying craft of our lord, the Grand Admiral, the Matrak said, her face and voice suddenly very tired and very alien. and it is coming here.